I never expected that helping a neighbor move a single piece of furniture would completely change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It's funny, isn't it? You go about your days in a perfectly straight line, a predictable rhythm of work, meals, and sleep, and you think that's all there is. You build a comfortable little world for yourself, one where the walls are high enough to keep you safe, but low enough that you can still see the sky and pretend you're not lonely. My world was like that for years. And then Julian moved in across the hall, and he didn't just knock on my door. He knocked down one of those walls. Let me explain. My name is Lucas, and at the time, I was 28. I worked from home as a web developer, which is a socially acceptable way of saying I spent most of my time in a symbiotic relationship with my computer, fueled by coffee and the quiet hum of my hard drive. My apartment was my sanctuary. It was on the third floor of an old brick building with floors that creaked and pipes that groaned, but it was mine. It had good light, a small balcony where I kept a stubbornly resilient fern, and a comfortable dent in the sofa that was perfectly molded to my body. My life was ordered. It was routine. I woke up, I coded, I ate lunch at my desk, I coded some more, I made dinner, and I watched something on a streaming service before going to bed. The most exciting part of my week was usually the arrival of a package or finding a new flavor of tea at the grocery store. I wasn't unhappy, not really, but there was a quiet, persistent hum of loneliness underneath it all, a feeling I had gotten very good at ignoring. I told myself I preferred the solitude. It was easier that way. Less complicated, you know. The apartment across the hall had been empty for a few months after Mrs. Gable, a woman who had lived there since the 70s and smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs, moved to a retirement community. The silence from her unit was just another part of the building's familiar quiet. Then one Saturday, that quiet was shattered by the thud of boxes, the scrape of furniture against the floorboards, and the cheerful, booming laughter of new residents. I peeked through my peephole, my heart doing a strange little flutter of curiosity and anxiety. That was the first time I saw him. Julian. He was wrestling a ridiculously oversized floor lamp through the doorway, his back to me. Even from that angle, I could see the muscles in his shoulders and arms straining against the fabric of his gray t-shirt. He was tall, with a mess of dark, wavy hair that was damp with sweat. He was giving directions to a couple of other guys, his friends I assumed, and his voice was warm and easy, filled with a confidence that seemed to radiate from him like heat. He turned to laugh at something one of them said, and I got a full view of his face. And well, it was a great face. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose, and a smile that seemed to start in his eyes. He looked like the kind of guy who played a sport in college, the kind of guy who was effortlessly popular, the kind of guy who would have, at best, given a quiet, nerdy kid like me a polite nod in the hallway and never a second thought. My brain, with its years of carefully honed self-preservation, immediately filed him under unattainable and sealed the file shut. I stepped away from the peephole, my cheeks feeling strangely warm. Over the next week, I saw him a few times. He'd be heading out for a run in the morning just as I was getting my mail, or coming in with groceries as I was taking out the trash. He always gave me that easy smile and a casual, "Hey man," that was both friendly and utterly impersonal. I'd mumble a hey back, my eyes fixed on the floor, my heart pounding like I was the one who had just run 5 miles. He was just a neighbor, I told myself. A very, very attractive neighbor. Nothing more. I resigned myself to this new reality. My quiet hallway would now be punctuated by the existence of this impossibly handsome man who would serve as a constant, low-level reminder of everything I felt I wasn't. It was fine. I could handle it. I was a professional at handling things from a safe distance. I went back to my code, to my routine, to the comfortable quiet of my own apartment. I was safe in there. Nothing could get in unless I opened the door. And then, about a week after he moved in, there was a knock. It wasn't the tentative rap of a delivery person or the sharp thud of the superintendent. It was a firm, solid knock. I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. I wasn't expecting anyone. My social interactions were generally scheduled days in advance. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Julian. He was standing there, looking a little breathless, running a hand through his already messy hair. My stomach did a nervous flip. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the ridiculous stampede in my chest, and opened the door. "Hey," I managed, trying to sound as casual as he always did. Up close, he was even more intimidatingly handsome. He had flecks of gold in his brown eyes and a faint scattering of freckles across his nose. He smelled like sawdust and fresh air. He gave me a slightly sheepish, slightly apologetic smile. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I'm Julian, from across the hall," as if I didn't know. As if I hadn't already memorized the cadence of his footsteps and the sound of his key in the lock. "I know we haven't really met, but I'm in a bit of a bind." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Lucas," I supplied. "I'm Lucas," he beamed, and the full force of that smile felt like a physical thing. "Lucas. Right. So here's the thing. I have this one last piece of furniture to get in, and the friends who helped me move are all out of town. It's a beast. A couch. And I can't quite pivot it through the doorway on my own. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to spare. I can pay you for your time, of course." Pay me? The thought was absurd. My mind was racing. Part of me, the sensible, anxious part, screamed, "No. Make an excuse. You're busy. You have a deadline. You'll pull a muscle." But another part of me, a part that had been dormant for a very long time, was already propping the door open wider. "No, don't worry about that. Of course. Yeah, I can help." The words came out before I could stop them. His face flooded with relief. "Are you sure? Man, that would be amazing. You'd be saving my life." He wasn't just saving his life. He was tearing a hole in my carefully constructed routine. And the strangest part? I was letting him. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my shoes, and followed him out of my apartment and into his, leaving the safety of my predictable world behind. Julian's apartment was a mirror image of mine, but it felt completely different. Where mine was neat and minimalist, his was a chaotic explosion of half-unpacked boxes, stacks of books, and unassembled furniture. It smelled of fresh paint and cardboard. And there, sitting forlornly in the middle of the living room, was the couch. He wasn't kidding. It was a beast. It was an old-fashioned sofa, probably from the 50s, with dark, carved wooden legs and a heavy frame, upholstered in a deep green velvet that looked worn and soft. "This is the culprit," he said, patting one of its formidable arms. It was my grandmother's. I couldn't bear to part with it. And just like that, with that one sentence, the image I had of him shifted. The jock, the popular guy, was replaced by someone who treasured his grandmother's old velvet couch. It was a small detail, but it felt significant. It made him seem less like an archetype and more like a person. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "But it looks heavy," he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that echoed in the empty room. Heavy is an understatement. "Okay, so my plan, if you can call it that, is to get your end first. We lift, pivot at 90 degrees, and then sort of shimmy it through the bedroom door. It's the only place it'll fit for now." For the next 20 minutes, we were a mess of grunts, strained muscles, and shouted instructions. "Okay, on 3. 1, 2, lift." The couch barely moved. It was like trying to lift a small car. We were immediately too close, our shoulders bumping, our hands just inches apart as we found our grip on the dusty underside of the frame. I was acutely aware of his proximity, of the scent of his deodorant, of the way his bicep flexed right next to my face. "Okay, new plan," he panted after our second failed attempt. We slide it. Tip it on its back and slide it on a blanket. This worked slightly better. We managed to drag it across the floor to the bedroom doorway, but the angle was all wrong. We were sweating, breathing heavily, a team forged in the crucible of vintage furniture logistics. During a much-needed break, he disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 bottles of water. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a totally insignificant moment of contact, but a jolt went through my arm. I looked up and met his eyes, and for a second, I wondered if he felt it too. But he just smiled, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, and leaned against the wall. "Thanks again for this, Lucas. Seriously. I was about to give up and just sleep on it out here." He said it with a self-deprecating chuckle. It would have been a pretty sad start to my new life in this building. His casual use of the phrase, new life, struck me. He was starting over here. I was just continuing. "It belonged to your grandmother?" I asked, needing to fill the silence, needing to know more about the man behind the smile. He nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah, she passed away last year. This couch was always in her sunroom. I spent half my childhood reading on it. She left it to me in her will. My parents wanted me to get rid of it, buy something new and modern, but I don't know. It feels like keeping a piece of her with me, you know? There it was again. A crack in the confident facade, a glimpse of a deeper, more thoughtful person. He wasn't just the handsome guy from across the hall anymore. He was a grandson who missed his grandmother. He was sentimental. He was vulnerable. And that, I realized with a sinking feeling, was far more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart than his good looks ever could be. I get that, I said, my voice softer than I intended. It's important to hold on to things like that. We were quiet for a moment, the only sound our own breathing and the distant traffic outside. It was a comfortable silence, a shared moment of understanding. The awkwardness I usually felt around new people, especially attractive men, had somehow evaporated in the shared struggle with the couch. He pushed himself off the wall. "All right, one more try," he asked, his voice full of a renewed determination. "I think if we lift the back end up, we can angle the front legs through the door." We took our positions again. This time, we moved in sync, a well-oiled, albeit very sweaty machine. He directed, I followed. We lifted, twisted, and pushed. The wooden leg of the couch scraped loudly against the doorframe. "Almost there," he grunted, his face inches from mine. "Just a little more." With one final, heroic shove, the couch lurched through the doorway and settled onto the bedroom floor with a heavy, definitive thud. We did it. We stood there, panting and grinning at each other, a ridiculous sense of triumph washing over us. We had conquered the beast. We were victorious. "We should test it out," Julian said, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Make sure all our hard work wasn't for nothing." He flopped down on one end of the couch, sinking into the green velvet with a contented sigh. He patted the cushion next to him. "Come on. You earned it." My mind screamed at me to say no, to make my excuses and retreat back to the safety of my own apartment. But I didn't. I couldn't. I walked over and sat down, keeping a respectable distance, but the old couch had a natural dip in the middle, and I slid slightly closer to him than I intended. The velvet was soft beneath my fingers. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, dust, and our shared effort. We sat in silence for a moment, just catching our breath. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us. It felt strangely peaceful, domestic even. It was a fantasy I didn't dare let myself entertain for more than a second. "Well, it's still comfortable," he said, breaking the silence. He stretched his arms over his head, his shirt riding up just enough to reveal a sliver of skin above his jeans. I quickly looked away, my face flushing. He let out a long, weary sigh and let his arms fall. He turned to look at me, a genuine, warm smile on his face. "Seriously, Lucas, thank you. I really appreciate this." "It was no problem," I said, my voice a little tight. Glad I could help. I knew I should get up. I knew I should leave. The job was done. My part in this little neighborhood drama was over. I needed to return to my side of the hall, to my own comfortable dent in my own sofa. But my body felt heavy, rooted to the spot. He shifted his weight, preparing to stand up. "All right, I should probably let you get back to your..." But as he pushed himself up, his foot, slick with sweat inside his sock, slipped on the polished wood floor. It happened in slow motion. His eyes widened in surprise, his arms pinwheeled for a split second, and then he was falling. He was falling right towards me. I didn't even have time to react before his full weight landed on top of me, pushing me back into the soft cushions of the couch. The air rushed out of my lungs in a surprised gasp. One of his hands landed on the cushion next to my head, the other on my chest, steadying himself. He had effectively pinned me down. My world suddenly shrank to the space of that velvet couch. He was heavy, but it was a solid, warm weight. I could feel the thud of his heart against my own ribs, a frantic, rapid beat that matched mine. His face was just inches from my own, so close I could see the individual specks of gold in his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. He was breathing hard, and I could feel his warm breath on my cheek. The scent of him, sawdust and sweat, and something uniquely Julian, filled my senses. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending was on high alert. This was the kind of proximity I only ever dreamed about, the kind of closeness that felt both terrifying and intoxicating. An accident. It was just an accident. He would scramble up any second, embarrassed, apologizing profusely, and the moment would be over. I braced myself for it, holding my breath. But he didn't move. For 1 second, then 2, then 5, he just stayed there. He didn't get up. He just lay on top of me, his eyes locked on mine. The surprise in his expression slowly melted away, replaced by something else. Something I couldn't quite name. It was confusion, maybe. Curiosity. It was an intense, searching look that seemed to peer right through me. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The world outside the couch, outside this bubble of shared space and breath, ceased to exist. All I was aware of was his weight on me, the heat of his body, the impossibly small distance between our faces. The air grew thick and charged, crackling with an unspoken electricity. This was no longer just an accident. The fall had been an accident, yes. But the lingering? This pause. This was something else entirely. This felt intentional. My mind was a chaotic storm of hope and fear. Was this really happening? Was I reading this correctly? Or was I just projecting my own desperate longing onto a simple, clumsy accident? He had to be feeling this too, right? This palpable tension, this sudden, deafening silence where 1,000 unspoken questions hung in the air. He had to. His gaze flickered down to my lips for a fraction of a second, and my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel it. This was it. This was the moment. He was going to kiss me. Or maybe he was going to pull back, laugh it off, and I would die of humiliation on his grandmother's antique couch. It could go either way. Then, as if waking from a trance, he blinked. The spell was broken. He pushed himself up abruptly, scrambling off of me so quickly he almost fell again. "Oh my God," he said, his voice husky. "I am so sorry. Are you okay?" I slipped. My sock the floor. He was rambling, running a hand through his hair again, a nervous gesture I was beginning to recognize. He wouldn't look at me. "I'm fine," I squeaked out, sitting up and trying to smooth down my shirt, my hands trembling slightly. No damage done, but that was a lie. Something had been irrevocably damaged. My carefully constructed peace, my emotional equilibrium. The air was still thick with the ghost of the moment, the memory of his weight, his warmth. "Right. Well," he said, still avoiding my eyes. "I've taken up enough of your time. Thanks again. For everything." His usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by a flustered, awkward energy. He was practically herding me towards the door. "Anytime," I managed to say as I stepped back into the hallway. "See you around." He just nodded, gave me a tight, fleeting smile, and shut the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, my mind reeling. Then I turned and walked the few feet back to my own apartment, locked the door behind me, and leaned against it, my heart still pounding in my ears. What in the world had just happened? The next few days were excruciating. The short expanse of hallway between our two doors became a minefield of anxiety. Every time I had to leave my apartment, I would pause with my hand on the doorknob, listening for any sign of movement from his side. I dreaded running into him, and at the same time, I desperately wanted to. It was a torturous push and pull of hope and fear. I replayed the moment on the couch 1,000 times, analyzing every detail until it was worn smooth in my mind. The fall was an accident. I was sure of that. But the pause, the way he stayed there, the look in his eyes, the flicker of his gaze down to my lips. That couldn't have been an accident. That felt deliberate. But what did it mean? My rational brain, the part that had protected me for so long, offered up a dozen plausible, non-romantic explanations. He was dazed from the fall. He was tired from moving. He was embarrassed and didn't know how to react. He was just a naturally tactile person. He was straight, and I was a lonely gay man seeing things that weren't there, building a fantasy out of a simple, clumsy mistake. This last explanation was the most likely and also the most painful. But then there was the other part of me, the hopeful, foolish part. It clung to the memory of that moment, to the electric charge in the air. It insisted that what I felt was real and, more importantly, that it was shared. That look in his eyes wasn't confusion, it was recognition. He felt it too. He was just as scared and uncertain as I was. This part of me was relentless, whispering possibilities into the quiet of my apartment. Our few interactions in the hallway did nothing to clarify things. The easy friendliness was gone, replaced by a palpable awkwardness. The first time I saw him, the day after the couch incident, he was checking his mail as I was leaving. He saw me, and for a split second, he looked like a deer in headlights. He gave me a quick, tight-lipped smile, and a mumbled hey, before practically fleeing back into his apartment. There was no casual chat, no friendly banter, just a thick, uncomfortable silence. It was a clear signal, wasn't it? He was embarrassed. He regretted how close we'd gotten. He was trying to re-establish a boundary, to put distance between us. The rational side of my brain scored a major victory. I was an idiot. I had imagined everything. I needed to forget it ever happened and go back to my quiet, solitary life. And so I tried. I threw myself into my work, coding late into the night. I put on my headphones and blasted music to drown out the sound of his comings and goings. I tried to rebuild the comfortable walls around myself, but it was no use. They felt flimsy now, transparent. I was constantly aware of him, of his presence just a few feet away. Every creak of his floorboards, every time I heard his key in the lock, my stomach would clench. I became a detective of sound. I learned the rhythm of his days. He left for a run around 7 in the morning. He usually cooked dinner around 6:30. I could sometimes smell garlic and onions wafting under the door. He listened to good music, mostly indie rock and old soul. These little details felt like clues, but I had no idea what mystery they were supposed to solve. They just made him feel more real, more present, and made my longing for something I couldn't have even more acute. I was miserable. The quiet loneliness I had managed to ignore for so long was now a roaring silence. The routine that had once comforted me now felt like a cage. The couch incident had given me a glimpse of something more, a spark of connection, of possibility, and now that it was gone, its absence was a hollow ache in my chest. I had to face the truth. I was falling for my neighbor, and he was clearly trying to get away from me as fast as he could. I decided I had to be the one to fix it. I would be mature about this. The next time I saw him, I would be breezy and casual. I would act like nothing had happened. I would give him a friendly, uncomplicated, hey, how's the apartment coming along? And prove that I was totally, completely, 100% unaffected by him falling on top of me. That would put him at ease, and we could go back to being polite, distant neighbors. It was the sensible thing to do. Of course, I never got the chance. Because on the 4th day of our Cold War of awkward hallway encounters, there was another knock on my door. It was late, almost 10 at night. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew it was him. I walked to the door on unsteady legs, my carefully rehearsed casual greeting completely forgotten. I looked through the peephole. It was Julian, just as I'd known. He was standing there, his shoulders slumped, looking down at his shoes. He looked nervous. I opened the door. He looked up, and the expression on his face was one I hadn't seen before. It was vulnerable, uncertain, and deeply earnest. The confident, easygoing guy was gone. In his place was someone who looked just as anxious as I felt. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. Can we talk for a minute?" My own voice was stuck somewhere in my throat, so I just nodded and stepped back, holding the door open for him. He walked into my apartment, my space, and it felt like a monumental event. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room, looking around. "Nice place," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thanks," I finally managed to say. "Is everything okay?" He finally met my eyes, and the full weight of his anxiety hit me. "No, not really," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Look, Lucas, I've been a total idiot this week. Avoiding you, being weird in the hallway. I'm sorry. It's okay," I said automatically, even though it wasn't. "Don't worry about it." But he shook his head again, more forcefully this time. "No, it's not okay. Because I've been weird for a reason. And it's not the reason you probably think." My heart started to pound again, a frantic, hopeful drumbeat. He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into deep water. "The other day," he started, his gaze unwavering, on the couch. "When I fell, that was an accident. I swear. I'm just that clumsy." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "But staying there, lying on top of you for what felt like an hour, that wasn't an accident. The world tilted on its axis." He said it. He admitted it. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. I just stared at him, unable to speak, waiting for him to continue. My entire future seemed to hang on his next words. "I panicked," he confessed, his voice laced with self-reproach. "I completely panicked. 1 minute, I'm falling, and the next, I'm looking at you, and all I can think is that I don't want to move. All I can think is that I really, really want to kiss you. And that thought scared the hell out of me. So I jumped up and basically threw you out of my apartment. And I've been kicking myself for it ever since. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. It was real. It was all real. The look, the tension, the unspoken energy. I had felt it because it was there. He had felt it too. I finally found my voice. You wanted to kiss me? I asked, the words sounding small and fragile in the quiet room. He nodded, a small, shy smile finally breaking through his anxious expression. Yeah, I really did. I've kind of wanted to since the first day I saw you. If I'm being honest, he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. I saw you through your window when I was moving in. You were watering a plant on your balcony. And I don't know. I got this feeling. I was hoping I'd run into you. I was trying to work up the courage to ask you for coffee or something, but I kept chickening out. Asking for help with the couch was a desperate move. My mind reeled, trying to process this new information. He had noticed me first. He had been nervous too. The confident, unattainable guy from across the hall was just as insecure and uncertain as I was. It was a revelation that changed everything. So you didn't need help with the couch? I asked, a slow smile spreading across my own face. He winced. Okay, no, the couch is definitely a two-man job, but I probably could have called another friend. I wanted an excuse to talk to you. And then I fell on you, and my brain just short-circuited. He took a hesitant step closer to me. I get it if I totally blew it, or if I read everything wrong. If you're not, you know. I am, I said quickly, my voice firm and clear. I am. And you didn't read it wrong. The relief that flooded his face was beautiful to see. The tension that had been strung so tightly between us for days finally snapped. He took another step, closing the distance between us until he was standing right in front of me. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before gently cupping my jaw. His thumb brushed against my cheek, and the simple touch was electric. So, he said softly, his brown eyes searching mine. Can I try this again? Without the falling part. I didn't need to answer with words. I just leaned in, and he met me halfway. The first kiss wasn't clumsy or accidental. It was gentle and sure, a question and an answer all in one. It was full of all the unspoken things from the past week, all the anxiety and hope and longing. It tasted of relief. It felt like coming home. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, resting our foreheads against each other. Yeah, I whispered. You can definitely try that again, and he did. In the weeks that followed, the hallway between our apartments transformed. It was no longer a no-man's land of awkward tension, but a pathway connecting our two worlds. Our doors were often left propped open, and the silence was replaced with the easy flow of conversation, of shared music, of laughter that spilled from one apartment into the other. We started with coffee, then graduated to dinner, then to entire days spent together. We learned each other's routines, not through muffled sounds and guesswork, but by living them side by side. I discovered that he hummed off-key when he cooked, that he had an encyclopedic knowledge of bad 90s action movies, and that his confident exterior hid a deeply kind and sometimes surprisingly shy person. He learned that I couldn't function without my morning tea, that I had a terrible habit of leaving books open all over my apartment, and that my quiet nature wasn't aloofness, but just my way of observing the world. His apartment slowly came together, the boxes disappearing one by one, replaced by pieces of his life. And his grandmother's green velvet couch, the catalyst for everything, became our spot. It was where we watched those bad action movies, where we had long talks late into the night, where we would sit and read in comfortable silence, my head on his shoulder. It was no longer just his piece of the past. It became a part of our shared present. A few months after that first, hesitant knock on my door, we were sitting on that couch. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and the soft drumming of water against the window pane was the only sound in the room. I was leaning against him, his arm draped comfortably around my shoulders, an open book forgotten in my lap. I was just watching the rain, feeling a sense of peace that was so deep and profound it felt like it had settled right into my bones. He pressed a soft kiss to the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. I smiled, turning my head to look at him. "I was just thinking about this couch," I said. "And how much I hated it for about 20 minutes," he laughed, the sound a warm rumble in his chest. "Yeah, she's a beast. But she's a pretty great couch." "She's the best couch," I corrected him. "She brought you to my door, He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer. I would have found another excuse, he said, his voice earnest. It might have taken me longer. I might have had to stage a fake plumbing emergency or pretend I didn't know how to work my oven. But I would have gotten here eventually. I knew he was right. You spend so much time building your life a certain way, thinking you know the blueprints by heart. You build walls for safety and routines for comfort, and you convince yourself that you're content with the quiet solitude. But sometimes, life has other plans. Sometimes, a person moves in across the hall, and they don't just knock on your door. They knock on your heart, asking for a little help, and in the process, they move your whole world into a brighter, more beautiful room.